Well, hello, and welcome to Ffilm Craic. This is the show where we take a probing finger to the nooks and crannies of cinema, and we see if we can tease out some gold. Basically, we talk about movies that are little seen, or versions of movies that are little seen, movies that have slipped through the fine mesh of I don't know where this metaphor is going. So anyway, today we're going to talk about a movie called The Resurrected from 1992, directed by Dan O'Bannon.
1991.
Well, of course.
1994.
Not actually what it says on the internet. Clive is going to correct me. Excellent, Clive. Excellent. So that's for your bingo cards at home.
Yes.
That is one of the things you should be keeping an eye out for.
Yes. At any point now, Eddie's going to phone me.
Yes, for sure. I will certainly mention, well, H.P. Lovecraft, that's unavoidable today, and probably somehow Tom Baker from Doctor Who.
And Lone Wolf and Cub.
And Lone Wolf and Cub, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, what are your recurring themes, Ron, other than claiming that Clive is bullying you?
You should acknowledge our guests.
I should acknowledge the fact that we have I feel like we all know each other so well that that our viewers couldn't possibly not know who.
This is my first time on the film.
Regardless.
What is it called? Film Craic. What are we on? What is this? Craic?
This one's called Ffilm Craic, Ron.
Craic. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So how you? Well, okay.
It's spelled two different ways. It's spelled two different ways, Ron. I'll explain this for you right now. So,
sure.
Craic in Ireland does not mean those rocks that one would smoke in a pipe. It means a good old time. So it's spelled C-R-A-I-C.
Right.
So,
okay.
Them fellas are good crack. They're lots of fun.
That had never occurred to me before, that our title could indicate that we're watching films while smoking crack,
which might make some of them more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And we would be having great crack.
Oh yeah,
crack as well. Yeah.
So yes, and then the other crack is these are the films that have fallen through the cracks of history.
Cracks, I see. While smoking crack.
It was our Clive there who came up with this, and it's a good. He does most of our titling here,
right.
And he does a good job.
I guessed that one on this one. So, yeah.
Fair play to you there, Clive. He's good with words.
Right.
So anyway, Ron, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh yeah. Well, hi. If those of you who don't know me, I'm Ron. I'm from Canada, but I live here in Japan. I'm in Japan now, and I'm the co-host with Magic Morning Wood with Clive, an audio podcast, and also a co-host with the other one with Clive, the Septic Shock Road Trip, where we watch movies going through the American states. And I'm a frequent guest on Clive's other billion podcasts. So this is my first time on the Craic. Is that what it's called? Craic?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. You've been on the literary as feck before,
right?
And then I've been by your way a few times.
Yes.
On your own various shows.
Right.
And I don't know, Clive, do you need to introduce? I mean, you're kind of the Venn diagram of all of this garbage. You're kind of right in the middle there, where it all overlaps. Do you need to introduce yourself?
No, I am the VD.
Okay, all right.
The venereal disease. Okay.
Oh, the Venn diagram.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
All right. So yeah. So I won't go on at too great length before we get started and kind of jump into the film. But the movie in question is apparently from 1991.
Yeah.
It is The Resurrected. It has another title, which I can't. Clive, you're better at this stuff. What's the other title that?
Well, apparently it started life as The Ancestor, but the other one, which I quite like, is Shatterbrain.
Oh yes. Good
title.
And it is. It's based on a book by H.P. Lovecraft, who, if you don't know, was a writer of weird fantasy and horror fiction, who in his own lifetime, I don't know if he ever saw a book published. I don't think so. I think everything was published, like he saw his short stories published in Weird Tales and various other kind of like low rent fantasy and kind of almost zines of the time in some cases. But then after he passed, a group of kind of devoted followers or fans of his kept his work in print, and in fact developed a whole publishing house just to publish his work in book form. And over years, his reputation has grown and grown. And now he's considered to be, you know, one of the great horror writers of the 20th century. And, you know, various people like Neil Gaiman and Stephen King and all kinds of contemporary horror writers kind of nod back to him as being really a pretty awesome guy. And I'm a huge fan. So I'm not, in no way can I be, what's that word where you can stand outside of something?
Objective.
Impartial. Yeah. Because I fell in love with, I fell in love with his writing in my early 20s, and I still think it's a cracking good read. That doesn't mean that every movie based on his writing is any good, and quite a few of them are not.
Worth mentioning as well, because we were talking Venn diagrams, he was also in his time as well, because everyone seems to have corresponded with him, right? And he was friends with people like what's his name, Robert Howard, right? And Clark Ashton Smith and all those other luminaries of the weird tales. Seems to have had a correspondence with him, and he kind of seems to have created this framework for this sort of cosmic horror as well, right? He's seems to be the glue that sticks it all together in a way.
Yes, and if you don't know who Robert E. Howard is, he's the guy who created Conan the Barbarian, most famous for creating Conan the Barbarian. And then I think Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho, was very early, like as a teenager, was a correspondent.
Yes, and early, if you read really early Robert Bloch, it's very much Lovecraft pastiche, as was a lot of Stephen King's early stuff as well.
I think almost everybody who writes horror nowadays begins with kind of trying to ape Lovecraft's
So when Nick had the idea of talking the Resurrected, and we'll get to this, a particular version of the Resurrected as well. We were both long-term Lovecraft obsessives, and then we were thinking, it would be nice to have him on the show anyway, but why don't we have someone who's slightly less Lovecraft obsessed, because then that would give us an impartial or an objective window onto this film. So were we right to make that call? And as far as I know, you're not a huge Lovecraft.
I mean, I'm not a deterrent. No, like a. No, I'm not the. I don't dislike him, but I'm not the best. I'm not the. I'm not certainly not an aficionado of Lovecraft. I have the complete works, but I haven't read all of them. I started to read this book after watching the movie yesterday, but I just didn't have time to get through the whole thing. But I read like the first part of it. So
the case of Charles Dexter Ward, right?
Yes, yeah.
I haven't read it in quite. I had hoped to read it actually before we got to this, but I haven't read it in some years either. But I do remember that, generally speaking, the movie's fairly other than updating the time and changing. I think the lead character is not he's a doctor in the original book, and he's made a private investigator. Other than that, it's actually very hews very closely to the book, surprisingly.
There's one difference I found that it's a very small difference. I don't know why they decided to change it, but that the ancestor was actually the other one. In the book, he was supposed to be I think like in the movie, they've made his ancestor the guy who was having an affair with his wife. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, like so so they've made Kerwin his ancestor, but in this one it's I don't know, the relationship seemed to be opposite based on the book versus the movie. I didn't really understand why they changed that, but yeah. So
yeah, I didn't.
Sorry.
I wanted to reread it as well, and then I tried to. I know I've got it. I got so tired of moving piles of books around to find it, and I still couldn't find it. Fuck it, and because I do remember it being faithful. The main point I wanted to clarify was it was faithful in tone as well as the main kind of narrative thrust of it as well.
And I suppose it's worth mentioning that this is one of only 2 movies directed by the director, Dan O'Bannon, who most people, if they know him at all, will know him as the writer of Alien for Ridley Scott, and he was involved in John Carpenter's early Dark Star movie, quite closely involved. And then, you know, I'm a huge fan actually of the other movie he directed, Return of the Living Dead. The zombie punk, you know, thing with what's her name? She's wonderful. Yes. So for me, you know, this was a bit of a marriage made in heaven. Okay, well, you know, I love Dan O'Bannon stuff, and I love Lovecraft, and so this was, you know, and I guess we'll get into it in a moment. I think it is good overall, but I don't think it's that. Funnily enough, by being so faithful and so you know, actually, I think it's mostly the performances that let this down, and we'll talk about that, I guess. I think the acting is not particularly good, and it surprises me because when you go back and rewatch, say, Return of the Living Dead, everyone's so over the top. I mean, which I guess is part of the fun of the movie, but like everyone's acting the hell out of and chewing the scenery. And I found like this movie, except for Chris Sarandon, who plays kind of our villain, and in a way, almost our lead character. Other than him, everyone's very flat. I don't know what you guys thought.
Well, I will get to that because I have that connects into my overall kind of feeling of it. But had you seen this one before by any chance, Ron? Had you stumbled across this?
No,
okay.
No, I had never. No.
And we should also establish, Nick, before we jump into a kind of you can do a quick kind of plot synopsis.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You chose a particular version of this film as well, right? Because people might be wondering, oh, the Resurrected, that's not necessarily a Film Crack film, because there's a Blu-ray, etc. But you chose a particular version of this.
Yes, yeah, true. I mean, it's worth bringing up because it is little seen regardless. And yes, there is a Blu-ray, but I mean, even when it was originally released, it was basically denied a theatrical release and kind of shunted off onto video. And there was a bunch of issues with it at the time being taken out of the hands of Dan O'Bannon, who I think was quite sick as the post-production was going on, and the movie was kind of taken, and so things were done with it that he wasn't happy about. And so this version that we watched is a composite print put together by fans from scenes taken out of the work print of the movie, scenes that I think Dan O'Bannon had wanted in the movie, placed back into the movie, and then put into so you'll see in the version we watched, there's very variable quality. You'll go suddenly from fairly decent looking DVD quality to a quite grubby looking VHS for little chunks of the movie, and then you'll pop back out again.
No, this is very much the Rodney Dangerfield of the Lovecraft adaptations, right? It just doesn't get no respect, right?
Yes.
Which is a shame, because it's well, we'll get to this, but in some ways it's the most successful Lovecraft, or one of the most successful Lovecraft adaptations I've ever seen. I think, and kind of gets really close to capture. I mean, for instance, you have other really fun films based on Lovecraft, like Reanimator, for example. But Reanimator is not really representative of H.P. Lovecraft, right? It's kind of hijacking Lovecraft to do its own thing.
Although weirdly enough, if you go back and I think that's because the stories, like the Herbert West stories, are not representative of Lovecraft.
That's true.
He wrote them. He wrote them very early, and they are very pulpy and very fun and very over the top and gross. And so in a way, but really nothing like his later work. But that movie does a great job. I think rightfully it should be considered maybe the greatest Lovecraft adaptation, even though it doesn't feel like Lovecraft all that much, just because it's so well done. Reanimator, the original Reanimator.
But I think they did take a few cues with this film. I think they found that sweet spot where they did Lovecraft justice, but they also remembered that Reanimator and From Beyond and stuff like that had lots of, gribbly effects and stuff. So we need to include that as well. And that's all. Anyway, so what's the kind of very quick plot rundown?
So basically, there's so Chris Sarandon, who is kind of plays a dual role in this movie as Joseph Kerwin, and what the hell is Charles Dexter Ward, the name of the movie or the name of the book. So he plays Charles Dexter Ward, who discovers that he has. Well, I guess in the movie he doesn't necessarily know that he's an ancestor, right? I feel like in the book he knows that he has this ancestor who was this magician figure who has discovered a way to defeat death. And part of that way is he somehow grinds up the bodies of and mixes them with chemicals and creates these things, what he calls essential salts, and then uses this chemical process to bring these or raise these people back up. And he's been kind of pilfering,
alchemist, right?
He's an alchemist. He's been pilfering the graveyards of old Europe and bringing all of these kind of great brains. It's funny, actually, there's a book. What's the book you lent me, Clive, about the necroscope?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Brian Lumley.
Brian Lumley?
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminded me actually of that. And I realized, I'm guessing that might be where Lumley got his idea.
Brian Lumley, again, a very much a Lovecraft aficionado.
Mm-hmm. So he's been kind of, in a way, we get the feeling he's been pilfering the brains of all of these previous alchemists, like these Nicholas Flamels and stuff, by bringing them back, using this weird chemical process of returning them to some form of living flesh. In any case, he sort of almost reaches through time and unhinges the mind of his ancestor, who becomes obsessed with figuring out the secrets, and then actually does bring back Joseph Kerwin, who turns out is a doppelganger who looks just like Charles Dexter Ward. So in the movie version, basically Charles Dexter Ward's new wife has come to this private investigator because her husband is acting very weird, and the police have come and found a bunch of cadavers that he's been experimenting with, and she's worried about. And then he's disappeared with this creepy bearded doctor fellow, and so our private investigator kind of investigates and figures out that something
privately,
yes, as you do, discovers that something unearthly and bizarre has happened. That initially he thinks, oh, this guy's been kind of working too hard, and he's convinced himself that he is his own ancestor. But as events transpire and as time goes on, he starts to see another picture emerge. I don't know if we need to say much more than that.
No, we should probably say as well, I mean, we'll get into spoilers here, so beware if you haven't seen it. All of that stuff that Nick's just said as well is stuff that's slowly revealed during the course of the film rather than front and center.
Oh, yeah.
Like it does play a little bit like, another thing it reminded me of a little bit, although I think it works better, was, do you remember there was a couple of TV movies where they were kind of like private investigator, but more like 30s, 40s noir mixed with H.P. Lovecraft. There was one called Cast a Deadly Spell.
Yes, yeah.
And there was a sequel called Witch Hunt with Dennis Hopper. I think this works better than both of those films.
Yes.
Did.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And this is, sorry, maybe I should say, this is not the first time this has been adapted to cinema either. This was adapted as The Haunted Palace by Roger Corman's. I can't remember if he directed it himself or if it was just by his, AIP or whatever, with Vincent Price playing the part of Charles Dexter Ward and Joseph Kerwin.
Right.
And it was released kind of falsely under like Edgar Allan Poe's The Haunted Palace, even though it was a very, in many ways, also a fairly faithful retelling.
Right, but not as
and it's not. No, it's not as good as, but it's not as bad as it's made out to be either. I have a certain soft spot for. There's a few quite arresting images in it that are kind of creepy.
There is another one as well. There's an earlier one. There's a Mexican film, which I've not seen.
Wow.
Which was released by Jerry Warren as Creature of the Walking Dead.
Okay.
I think I haven't seen it, and but I have heard that it is a kind of unofficial version of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Okay. Anyway, we seem to have been gabbing a long time, Nick, and I would like to know, just a quick, what did you make of the Resurrected? We can get into details and stuff, Ron, but what did you make of this film?
Well, again, not again, but I haven't. So I'm not I like H.P. Lovecraft, and I love horror fiction, so that and it's H.P. Lovecraft has always been sort of like a little bit of a blind spot for me, and I've always meant to, like, I have the complete works, and I've been always meant to read them, but it's just sort of like something I just haven't gotten around to yet, kind of thing. So, but of course, it's something that I usually enjoy when I have read them in the past. Yeah, so I came into this completely blind, not having read the story beforehand and not really knowing the story. But
good,
and,
that's a job. So
yeah,
well done.
Yeah. Okay, so and then it wasn't even until like halfway through that I realized that it was. I guess it did say at the beginning it was based on an H.P. Lovecraft story, but I think I didn't really clock it until. And then I started looking up some information as I was watching it. I was like, oh, it is okay, H.P. Lovecraft. Okay. Which to be honest gives it a little bit more like weight or legitimacy, I guess, than you would say it's just a general like 90s horror film, right? Just like, oh, okay, this is based off something, so maybe it made me sort of pay more attention to it, almost, sort of. And yeah, I thought the how do I say I thought as you said that some of the performances were a little wooden, but I thought Chris Rennan was great. I really yeah. So I'm a big fan of Chris Rennan from all the way back from Prince Humperdinck, and so in The Princess Bride,
Fright Night as well, right? He's in
Fright Night, yeah. So I think he's an underappreciated actor. I think Chris Rennan in general, and I thought he like knocked it out of the park in terms of what this movie had to do. I thought it was unfortunate that some of the other people didn't really hold their own, and it was really 90s. If that makes sense. It was just a really 90s movie. And I also really liked what's her name, the Jane Subbett, the wife, who I remember from Herman's Head, the TV show.
I totally forgot. Wow.
Yeah, she was. So for some reason
that's a deep cut, Ron.
For some reason she's always stuck with me over the years from Herman's Head. From
I was thinking actually while watching this, I was thinking, she's Ron's type.
in the early 90s, she was. Yeah, that's for sure.
I have to admit, both the leads, other than Chris Sarandon, John Terry and Jane Subbett, were unfamiliar to me. Again, mostly I suppose because of the more of a TV personality in her case.
Yeah. But apparently, I didn't know that John Terry went on to be like one of the main actors in Lost, because I didn't watch much of Lost.
More interesting than that, and I can't believe I didn't realize this, John Terry was Hawk the Slayer.
Wow. Okay. Awesome.
And he was also in Tuxedo Warrior as well, the Cliff Twemlow
nice
movie. Yeah.
Okay, so he's got some interesting
credits. But anyway, carry on, Ron.
Yeah, I thought the script definitely could have used a little bit of work. I thought the adaptation was wooden a little bit. Some of the dialogue was it was very expositional. A lot of the time it's like, let's sit down at a restaurant and explain exactly what's happening, right? So
that's
very Lovecraft.
Yeah, but it wasn't cinematic though, right? So I guess, right. So but I thought I was very, very impressed by the special effects. I thought the special effects were excellent. I think it was like surprisingly good. Like I was like, whoa, that's like better than it should have been in a movie of this quality. Much more than I expected. It was it was properly like gruesome and really well done. So kudos to whoever the special effects team was.
Masters. And the thing is, it's not a name that jumps out at you, right? It's not like John Carl Buechler or Greg Nicotero or someone like that. You kind of have to look him up, like, the name. I mean, not to me anyway, at least, and I tend to, be kind of familiar with the big hitters in the effects world. But were you familiar with Todd Masters, Nick?
No, and I, wholeheartedly concur with both of you. Like I think that stuff is great. There's a great, I don't know what the line is. It's in the book and it's in the movie. But basically, so if the corpses are incomplete or whatever, the powder, the ground bones are incomplete, they bring back these things that are not proper humans. They're inside out. And I think he says like the liveliest monstrosities or something like that. And those things are really well done and very disturbing.
Yeah.
These shambling, half-opened, monstrous-looking things. And like the scene where, and again, one of the best scenes I think in the movie really is the scene where they're exploring the kind of the warren of caverns or tunnels underneath the Kerwin estate, and where these things kind of appear out of the darkness for these flashes, and it's it's properly scary and creepy.
Yeah, the catacomb scene was really well done, and they really did it, like they amped up the tension quite well, and the oh no, the flashlight doesn't work, oh no, okay, now I've got a match, oh no, there's only one match left, oh no, and there's stuff, and you don't know what's just outside. It was properly well done. Really good.
I think it also works on the cosmic level, which is why it makes such a good Lovecraft, because it's not just it is good tension, and it does build in that way, but it also feels really atavistic, right? Like as soon as they go down, and it feels like they're going like into some cosmic darkness and going back in time or something, and when they find that pit full of just living things just wriggling around, it's just like, this is horrible. Like this is really, 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 everything about it is conceptually horrible, and it works. It builds the tension, and I know there's that scene where there's a close-up of like the Goya painting, like Jupiter eats his children or whatever. But I'm thinking they're more Hieronymus Bosch than Goya. Those creepy, is like conceptually fantastic and pulled off well as well, right? Like
and there's an earlier one too, which is, I think, is really well done. It's and again, it's for me, it's the kind of thing that it's pure Lovecraft. There's a flashback to whatever, the 1700s or whatever it is, right? And these ancestors of Charles Dexter Ward are, it's the original Kerwin back when he was, I guess, alive and young. Anyway, these things, there's a flood, and so some of these things wash up and float down the river. Monstrosities from this thing, and one of them kind of comes ashore, and it's really creepy and disturbing. And then at the end credits, I was like, hang on, so it was Deep Roy, and I don't know if you know who Deep Roy is.
Oh yeah. Because I saw that Deep Roy was in the cast, but I didn't know who he played in it.
He played that kind of half thing that was kind of flailing around on the. And I was like,
the Oompa Loompa in the.
Yes.
Right. Okay. In the Johnny Depp challenge.
Yeah.
And he's also, I think he's the sidekick in the new Star Trek movies. The what's his face, Simon Pegg's, Mr. whatever the hell his name is.
I didn't see the new one, so
the Scottish guy who runs the transporters.
Mr. Scott.
Mr. Scott. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, he's his sidekick. Anyway, it was exciting to see him in an earlier role.
So carry on, Ron. You were on a roll there, kind of.
Excuse me. Yeah. So I thought I'm not sure where I left off, but my roll stopped, I think. But but I thought it definitely inspired me to go and read the book. Unfortunately, I just didn't have time to finish it before talking today. But I was like, oh well, like it was elevated higher than I expected it to be. Like when it was like a 91, 92, 94-ish kind of movie.
91, what's the confusion? It's 91.
Somewhere in the early 90s anyway.
No, not somewhere, 91.
From a movie of that time period.
You not understand time.
For a movie of that general time period.
Fuck you, Ron. Fuck you, the horse you rode it on.
It's I don't know. I didn't expect much. Like I just say, my expectations were quite low.
Yeah, because you're like, this is 91 and it's straight to video.
Yeah, straight to video, and I was like, oh, and I was like, it's starring Jane Sibbett from Herman's Head. I was like, I didn't have a high I didn't have high hopes for it, right? So I was curious why you guys had picked this particular movie, also because it seemed, as I said, my understanding of this show is that it's like really hard to find movies, and I was like, this didn't seem like it was like I never heard of it, but it didn't seem like it was that out of the way kind of thing. So, but then I saw the composite and with the the bits missing, that they had, went really, really fuzzy for a while, and then went back in, the sound quality went down and went back up to good. But it was, and overall, I have to say it was quite well done, I thought. I mean, there was some stuff they could have done better with, like the acting and the expositional parts. But generally speaking, it was quite a good ride, I thought. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I'd like to stick up a little bit for the acting, because so what I really like about this film is, and I think this is deliberate, I don't think this is just kind of me reading too much into it, but so for one thing, the exposition dump stuff and the slightly uneven narrative where it's all build up, and then a big monster came and we all run away ending is very Lovecraft. So I think they've almost, and I suppose it's up to the viewer whether that's to its detriment or whether, the fact that they went out their way to make it authentic in that way, or if, well, you should have taken the elements that worked and fixed, you can go either way with that, right? But also, and in conjunction with that a little bit, I think it has just the right tone. It's just the right side of cartoonish, and it's played very, very straight, but it's slightly heightened, and yes, the characters do exclaim very kind of comic book kind of dialogue, and there's like one bit where something comes to life, like this horrendous thing comes to life, and there's a close-up of Jane Sibbett just going, "Oh no!" But somehow it just about works. Like I think it reminds me of the way, like similarly how David Lynch uses like Kyle MacLachlan or something. It's that kind of, it's not quite tipping its hand, like it's just playing it straight down the middle. And I think that kind of works for this material. And I like Robert Romanus in it as well, actually.
Is he Lonnie?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny because, obviously he has a much more, like, he has done far more in his career than I actually realized, because I looked him up, because I will always remember him, as I think most people will, from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And so he's just that character to me. So the first time I watched the movie, I remember being off-put by him being in it. I was like, what's that guy from Fast Times at Ridgemont High? But this time I actually appreciated what he brought to it. I think his performance is one of the strongest in the movie, actually.
Yeah. And he does a good job as well of giving dialogue, which is just a little bit, he plays it with conviction, right? Like he doesn't have his tongue in his cheek too much. And also I felt like, so watching it this time, I thought, it's close to 2-hour running time, and we'll get to this in a little bit. We'll discuss the difference in the versions or whatever. But I was thinking, because I didn't quite know how much had been cut out in terms of, and I was thinking that seems long. And then, because it's a slow burn, like we said, I was thinking, is this not gonna hold up? But it has a real cumulative effect. And by the time you get to the end of the film, it kind of more or less feels the length it's supposed to be. Like I didn't think it was overlong. But then trying to judge what the material that had been cut out from, because it's quite easy to tell because it suddenly turns into shit quality. So to identify it. I have thoughts, like some of it it would be nice to still have in it, and then other bits are a bit more
unnecessary.
Like the one element of it, which I don't necessarily mind, but so they really push the whole John Terry and Jane Sibbett having an affair part of the story, and a lot of that seems to have been missed because a lot of that was in shitty quality. And I wasn't sure if that was really an element that needed to be introduced.
I felt that element especially felt really tacked on and forced. And then at the end, suddenly she's pregnant, which is like this kind of oh, by the way, she's pregnant. Cut, and then never refers back to that again, like as if like he's gotten her pregnant. It seemed like really unnecessary. So I didn't.
that seemed to come along with the whole framing it in the private investigator femme fatale knocks on the door kind of stuff, right? That seems to have come along with that. But that aside, it all feels pretty much. I'm glad I saw this slightly longer version, even though I think it probably works more or less as well in its compromised version, I think.
Sure. I will say, I mean, being a fan of horror films, more gore is never a problem for me. I'm always happy to get, and that's one place where the dream scenes in this seem to be almost entirely gone, I guess, because they're all in that crappy, they all seem to be sourced from that crappy thing. And there's some of the stuff in there that's properly gross, like eyeballs getting gouged out and like brain saws, like much more actually reanimatory looking stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the final scene, we do actually see Chris Sarandon like tear the guy's head off and kind of like, you know, it's much more visceral than I think. And I think that should have all been left in.
That should be reinstated. That's the one bit I thought that's worth being there, right? Like
that scene stuck out to me because he's like clear quality and he's got the guy, and then shitty quality he's ripping the head off, and then clear quality from holding the head again. Right. So I was like, oh, they obviously like took that, just the ripping the head off, but like that was made it definitely it maybe sit up more anyway.
And he takes a bite out of it as well.
Oh yeah.
It was and I thought the dream scenes were quite effectively weird and like discomforting, and I was like, they were cool.
I agree with you, but I wouldn't necessarily miss them because they did slightly break up the narrative. But that one more detail to the decapitation, and that was the one thing that stood out to me as that really should be in it. And then if it had played without the other stuff, I wouldn't necessarily have minded. But they are they are fun to see. So, and like the scooping the brains out and stuff like that. And
it was, as I said, it reminded me of some of that stuff from, I mean, there's an extended cut of Reanimator that has like, and it just goes on and it becomes really grim.
Yeah,
have you ever seen that?
It's less fun, right? The extent.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they realized, oh, this is like, it's become an actual autopsy, and it's not funny at all. But yeah, I thought that stuff was all pretty good. The other thing that I will say this movie has great, and I completely stupidly assumed it was actually shot where it seems to, where it's set, right, which is in New England, right? I assumed, well, this is all, they must have shot it in Providence, right? And I believe you fellas, you took a road trip around there, didn't you?
We did,
because that was where one of the Fulci movies was made, right?
Right, and if it was shot there, we would have probably done it. So
I mean, a House by the Cemetery. You guys talked about it.
But it wasn't. It was shot in BC, right? So.
But yes, but this was shot in British Columbia. And I was like, what the hell? Because I obviously lived in BC, and I'm wondering, it must have been shot along the coast, like on Vancouver Island, or like along Vancouver, the coastline there.
Right.
And it doubles pretty effectively. I mean, it rains all the time there, so that works. But I thought the movie, it really effectively uses the landscape, like the houses, the kind of the graveyards, the gray constant raininess of it all. It just adds an extra level of kind of like grimness to it all.
So one thing I did want to mention, I think this might just be an error. So specifically what we watched was apparently it's not a director's cut necessarily, it's a work print, right?
Yes.
And someone's taken the HD version, and then on that Blu-ray, I believe, is the shitty quality longer work print, but then someone spliced it in so it kind of runs together. But and this just could be an error. When I looked it up on the IMDb, they claimed that the work print runs 2 hours and 17 minutes.
Okay.
Which is 20 minutes longer than the one we watched.
Okay.
Which sounds, that does sound too long, but I'm not sure, is that an error, do you think, or is there a longer work print again? Because I wouldn't have, I couldn't understand why, if you're going to do this, why wouldn't you go the whole hog, and why would you hold back 20 minutes? So I'm wondering if that just might be an error.
Yeah, I'm not sure,
if they didn't know where to put certain stuff, but I can't imagine there's another 20 minutes in this.
No, yeah, I'm not sure. I can look it up. The work print may be easily findable at the same place I found this composite, so I'll take a look. But yeah,
If there is,
I'm
I
not sure.
imagine it's more like sitting in the restaurant talking.
Probably. Yes, I doubt it's more of the gore and stuff. They would have put out. I'm sure they would have put all that back in.
Yeah.
If they...
But I'd also like to point out that even though we kind of almost used the composite version as an excuse to talk about a film that we enjoyed, I mean, if that's not available to you, I mean, you should just go out and see Resurrected anyway. Because I don't think the cut version is necessarily overly compromised, right? I think it still works really well. More of the good stuff is in there.
Yes, yeah, agreed.
So bringing this back to Ron's involvement as a non-Lovecraft head, we all seem to have kind of got a lot out of it, though, regardless of any baggage we might bring in, which also leads me to believe that this kind of works in and of itself, right? As a really pretty decent, probably one of the better horror films of its era, actually. That has been.
Yeah, 91 is not a banner year, I don't think.
No, it is an unfairly overlooked, I think. Still to this day.
I was surprised to hear that they refused to have it be a theatrical release, and that they just took straight to video, and then it became basically mostly forgotten, which is, I think it was undeserved. I think it could have became something. I think probably just people just didn't see it. But I think it probably could have. I'm surprised it hasn't built up more of a cult following over the years. So.
Yeah, no, it does have to. Some people are in the know, but no, you're right. I'm surprised it's not more so. Like you'd think it would be a bit more championed, but for whatever reason, it hasn't really set the world on fire then or now.
Was it the first watch for you too?
No, I watched it way back in the back when I lived in Canada. When I was reading the.
I remember talking about it with you back in the day, Nick. I think we both. This was a long time favorite so it was kind of fun to come back to it. But another reason we kind of roped you in as well is because we both felt as if we kind of knew what each other was going to say about it. We just kind of parroting one another. So we wanted a slightly different view on it. So it's quite interesting for me, at least, to see that you did enjoy it.
I definitely think that the Chris Sarandon specifically, and to some degree,
his teeth are great. Way. Chris
his teeth are great. Yeah,
because it's a big plot point. The two different versions of him and their teeth.
Yeah, Chris Sarandon and Robert Romanus and the special effects. I think those three elements basically elevated it among higher than what would be standard fare of this kind of era and this kind of ilk, I guess, right? So, yeah.
So if I have to recommend anything to you, Ron, do crack open that entire works of Lovecraft book and read the Dunwich Horror read the Shadow over Innsmouth.
Shadow over Innsmouth. Okay.
Yeah, and particularly if you only read one of them, then read the Shadow over Innsmouth. Okay. That remains probably my favorite horror.
Oh, really? Okay.
Ever.
I read the in the Mountains of Madness.
Oh, that's
which is like it's great, but that's like a full novel basically, almost, or like a novella.
It's
a novella. Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, this one is a novella too. The Charles.
Yes, Charles X. Ward. Yeah.
So,
in the Mouth of Madness would be my pick. For some reason, I've always been quite taken with that. Another one I like, which is a short story. What is it called? Is it called The Temple? Or you might know this, Nick. It's the one where there's like a submarine.
Oh yes, of course you'd like that one, Clive.
What's that one called?
The German sub. I think it is called The Temple. Yeah.
Yeah,
the German sub captain. Yeah.
That's a nice little. It's kind of like a light but quite weighted dose of Lovecraft at his most kind of cosmic way, which is an element that I really. That's the thing with Lovecraft for me, is it's that mixture of it's painting on that huge canvas, right? It's like It's not only just, it's all of the depth of space, but time as well, and everything just ancient. Anything you can think about. This is older. This is 1,000 times older and
Yes,
more evil and primal than anything else. I love all that. That's I'm a sucker for that. There's a lot of Lovecraft stuff, because I was thinking, watching this as well with the tunnels, all these Gribblies running around in tunnels. I was thinking, well, that's very Lurking Fear, another one of the stories.
Which is another,
And there's so many, and you're thinking, they're all kind of part of one big, far-reaching story, right? Like Lovecraft, it kind of repeats himself over and over and over again, but it doesn't matter, because he does it so well, and it comes from such a place of, he's got such a kind of concept of what, even though he doesn't quite know what it is, he's got such a good idea of what it looks like and sounds like and smells like, and it's just it's like the Ramones.
It's like the Ramones in that like they're doing this thing that's about this wide, and yet they can do it over and over again, and every time it's new, and at least for those first 5 or 6 albums, every time it's interesting, right? Like it's like a band who has this thing that they do so well, and they can just sort of reorganize it and present it, and every time it's satisfying.
But what I was going to say to that, but of course, luckily, Lovecraft died relatively young, so he didn't get to
yes, some of those,
right?
Yes.
Clive, didn't we do something else about Lovecraft earlier? I remember having a discussion about Lovecraft with you.
Yes, we did, but I'm struggling to think what it was.
Because my recollection of when I did something earlier about Lovecraft was that I guess he's also like famously like a horrible human being. Isn't that true?
Yes. I mean, in terms of like there's a actually, that's great. I'm glad you brought it up, because that was one thing that I was like, oh yeah, that's impressively Lovecraftian in all the wrong ways. Is like Raymond, the Chinese drug like opium dude that works for Kerwin, I was like, oh yeah, this is like, that's prime. So yes, there's some awful stuff regarding
I think it was maybe when we talked House by the Cemetery, even though that's not an official Lovecraft adaptation. There's a lot of Lovecraft in there, right? I think that's why when we might have been talking Lovecraft last, no, he was a notorious,
racist,
anti-Semite, and
not a great. I mean, I think he retracted some of that stuff later in life. But in his early writings, it's all over the place.
Well, I only read like the first, I don't even know how much of it was, but like the first little bit of this book, and there's like one line that really stuck out to me, which was sort of like talking about, because it sets up like Kerwin's farm and how the town sort of like, and all the weird things that go on and Kerwin's farm, and all like the people talking about like the stuff that happens and stuff, and like it talks about how like the slaves are kept disappearing, and it's like, oh well, all the slaves are disappearing because they were just Negroes and no one really noticed and stuff like that, right? And then there's one thing about like the woman, there was like someone that worked for him that was just horrible, and no one could even look at her because and it said probably because she was like a Negro, and it was so like oh
yes. Old man Kerwin had a farm.
Yes. So
to throw away
definitely that stuff shows up, and it shows up in the earlier writings, as I said, more than in the later writings. There's no getting away from it. It's definitely.
I guess I heard like the cosmic horror was like his like hatred
fear of seafood. Apparently, there was two main things. Yeah, there was a tremendous fear of seafood because he had a violent allergy to seafood, and therefore most of his monsters are some form of squid, hybrid, jellyfish, tentacle thrashing thing.
Okay.
And then a fear of mental illness that comes down family lines, which he did actually seem to suffer from, right? And then a fear of miscegenation, right? A fear of like race mixing. There's this fear that like someday you would be like, oh my goodness, my great grandfather was like a whatever. And this is like this idea of bad blood and outing over time. And which in a way, this is what this story is, right? It
And
is Kerwin's bad blood outing several generations down the line.
Right.
But yeah, you could read
Definite
that.
fear of the vag in there, I think.
Oh yes. He was not a macho, self-confident fellow, I think, with the ladies.
One of the more Lovecraftian images in recent cinema. Did you ever see that Cormac McCarthy adaptation, The Counselor? Did either of you see that?
No.
It's quite good, and there's a scene.
I still hate you for lending me The Road, to be perfectly honest.
Where
I read The Road right after, right at the time that the meltdown happened and all that stuff. Have you read The Road, Ron, or seen the movie?
Yeah.
Not a great book to read when you're hoarding together your little collection of Meiji almonds and looking at your kitchen knives and wondering if you have to kill a man. When the food runs out at the,
for those who don't know, Nick's a little bit of a hysterical hypochondriac. But there's a scene in, I think it's Javier Bardem is who we talked.
Oh yes.
He did the Rango episode where he's dating Cameron Diaz is very good in this film actually, and she plays this kind of very scary, strong woman with a very strong sexual appetite as well. And obviously they don't show this, but it's in the book, and they do it quite well in the film, where Javier Bardem talks about sitting in a car, and Cameron Diaz's character is doing kind of like a private dance for him on the hood of the car, and then kind of takes her underwear off and spreads her legs against the windscreen. And he talks about it, like it's one of those creatures at the bottom of the sea, like a bottom feeder, and it's a very Lovecraftian
tentacle sucker.
Yeah, a very Lovecraftian kind of fear of fear of females, right?
What's that painter, the woman who painted all of those vaginal flowers? George O'Keeffe. Yes, a great fear of George O'Keeffe paintings.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think you'd have found one of them hanging in
Lovecraft's place.
No. Anyway, right. So it got a big thumbs up from all of us, I think, right?
Yeah. I think it's as I said, I think for the time, I think, and I do think it's still widely considered to be one of the most faithful Lovecraft adaptations, and I think that's
by people who know,
by people who know, yeah. And I think if you like Lovecraft, it's definitely going to be more satisfying than lots of other movies throw the names around, right? Or we didn't even mention, hilariously enough, probably the most famous of Lovecraft's creations is a book, right? The Necronomicon, which appears in a number of his stories, which was then lifted by countless other, most famously probably Sam Raimi. And then there was even a fake version of it printed in the 70s, the Avon paperback Necronomicon.
Brent V. Friedman as well, who wrote the screenplay for The Resurrected, wrote one of the segments of the Necronomicon anthology film, if you remember.
Oh yes, yeah. Which is hit. That's I don't know. I haven't seen it so long, but I remember liking pieces of it. I don't know if that's
right. And there's also the Japanese hentai anime Mysteries of the Necronomicon.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, you can go down. That's another. In fact, we might get onto our other show. Nick, is the whole. I have one in a collection of 3 volumes, I think, of Lovecraft-inspired horror written by Japanese authors.
Oh yes, yeah.
And obviously the whole world of tentacle anime and all that stuff owes a debt.
Yes, yeah. Just generally speaking, the Japanese love of all things seafoody. It's a perfect match. It's a match made in heaven, and their nascent racism towards all other people, and the possibility of having some Korean blood in you, right, or whatever else that everyone in Japan always seems to be worried about. I should say everyone. No, lots of people are not. Just 1 or 2 of my students who would occasionally say things in my classroom that I would go like, "Wow, that could have come right out of Lovecraft." But yes,
but also crucially as well, it works even if you're not If you don't know
Yes,
about it,
yeah.
it works
It's
as a quick
Hmm.
horror
It's a
film.
decent little horror movie from the early 90s.
And if you're watching it and at first you're thinking, oh, this is a bit slow and boring, and you know the acting might not be to your taste, so it's a bit expositional, stick with it. Stick with it. I think it rewards. It's a cumulative effect.
Definitely had a good climax. Yeah, I think, and if Hollywood's listening, which they aren't, but if they were, they probably would deserve a reboot. I think this story. I think it probably would deserve from like a bigger budget and like an actual theatrical release of some point.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know anything about? Because I was just about to say, you know, I'm surprised there isn't like a long anthology show entirely based on Lovecraft. But does anyone know if that show, what's it called,
Lovecraft Country?
Yeah, or County. I can't remember which one it is. It
Country.
Country.
Yeah.
Does it actually have anything to do with Lovecraft? Has anyone seen
I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list, but I haven't seen anything to do with it.
Have you seen it?
I mean, no, I haven't seen it either, but I did hear, I mean, again, it's interesting because like in a way, I think it attempts to address some of the issues with Lovecraft. I mean, it's interesting, like some of his biggest fans of recent years have actually been people of color, right? S.T. Joshi, who's written all of those, like the most beautifully annotated versions of his stuff, you know, is in no way sympathetic to the racism, you know, and deals with it in a really clear, good way.
Is S.T. Joshi black?
I don't know if he's black, but I don't think that he's European, you know, Caucasian.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that anyway. I mean, maybe I'm talking out of my. Maybe I should look this up while we're on.
Maybe you're talking out
I'll
of
go
your
check.
Lovecraftian, pussy, sphincter-like orifice.
Exactly, it's entirely possible.
Anyway, maybe we should wrap it up then.
Sure.
Yeah. See ya. Oh, hang on, no, we should wrap it up like a Lovecraft. We should after building up all this menace and dread. Ah, there's a big monster! Quick, run away! Ah, I'm gone mad!